one outcome that you want.
Right, I'll call this out to order. My name is Wei Jet. I'm chairing semi-finals of Nationals 2015. Together with me are Kelvin, Pramod, Deborah, Wong Hai Wai, and Kelvin. On opening government, we have IIUMD. Opening opposition, we have IIUME. Closing government, we have IIUMC. And last but not least, we have Mara A. On the motion, a very long motion, given that there is compelling data to show that children born up in religious households are comparatively less ethical and compassionate than their secular counterparts, this house must not raise children with religion. I invite the Prime Minister to open this debate. That's right. I brought the hand here. Sorry. Alright, okay.
In a world where this data already exists, there's two burdens that side opening government want to undertake in this debate. As a parent, what is the best moral choice that you have to take for your upgrowing of your children? And number two, we would also like to consider the best outcome for other children around them as well. And these two questions will be answered in my arguments later. Let's go. We would like to promote a world of secularism. Remember, this debate is not about you directly forcing parents to undertake this moral choice. We are not, as the government, forcing parents or attacking directly on religious people. But we would like to say that as a parent, what is the best modus operandi that you have to undertake in growing up your particular kid? First argumentation, why as a parent we should do this? We think that religion prioritizes ethics and compassion. But the problem right now is this data clearly shows whatever is included in the elements of religion, it shows that something is wrong. You're bringing up that children in that particular environment means they're growing up to be less ethical or less compassionate. Sit down with Zal. It means, as a parent, you obviously want your child to grow up as a good person and you prioritize his value. I want to deposit to you, if you already have compelling evidence to show that bringing up in a religious environment is not going to make them a good person, they should stop doing so. And this is my first deposit of idea. Second, we think that in most religions, most of the methods are wrong in multiple contexts. First, although when they're good, they have good objective in raising our children. For example, you want to make them pray and so on. We think the methods of upbringing their children is extremely wrong. A few examples. Number one, when children skip a particular prayer, sit down with Zal, you whip him in order to teach him for him to pray and so on. For example, if he does bad action, you ignore him and says that you are not a part of my religion and you call him a sinner from a young age. These are the methods that are wrong, although you want to reach a good objective. Second, we would like to deposit you an idea that some elements of religions are gray area in notion, but how our paradigm will make sure that that sphere of discourse will be dramatically better in our paradigm. Number one, let's examine two scenarios. For example, treatment of women or treatment of people from other religions. Currently, we have a strong force that clearly discriminate women as well as discriminate people from other religions and call them sinners directly and therefore imposing upon a particular balance. In our paradigm, we would like to think that the damage that is being doing currently is due to the fact that you grow up to be less ethical and less compassionate. Therefore, your followers on that particular is not a good one in order to make sure that the sphere of discourse is a better one. Comparatively, in our paradigm, once you prioritize the idea of you being like strongly in terms of ethics and compassionate, That's where, once you grow up to be an adult and you want to choose to be a religious member of society, you will make sure that you enter the spectrum and you will make sure that that discourse itself is a better one, full of people who respects ethics and compassionate comparative in status quo where most of them don't have much ethics or compassion. Remember, this is like no compassion, but they have less. Sit down with yourself. Third of all, here's a comparative. Currently, some parents choose the option of shortcuts. They will teach the kids at a young age of concept of heaven and hell. We think that if you really want to teach this particular idea of heaven and hell, you should allow them to naturally join that particular sincere believer, and that's a much more better option and a moral choice for that particular parents. Versus, comparatively, in your parent where you fix and impose it upon them, we think that they will grow up to be a kid who is less compassionate, will be grow up to be less ethical. Eventually, he'll go to hell anyway. So if you think that as a parent, do you want your child to go to hell? Obviously not. So therefore, it's better for you to alert towards our side, since data shows that if you choose not to indoctrinate with religious ideologies, far better for them in that particular spectrum. We think this is extremely evil. Sit down. Fourth, parents currently are seen as extremely evil when they impose religion. Oftentimes, when you impose religious ideology upon your kids, the opposite effect happens. They don't become more religious because of few deadlocks or few blockades. For example, you are not taught to ask questions at a young age, which means you will seek other alternatives for your answer, and oftentimes this alternative might not be a good one. You might join certain gangs that will further push you away, and you will further insulate yourself. Comparative in our paradigm, maybe you become a Muslim or become a Christian and your own natural accord. That pathway to heaven is better. Conclusion of the first argument is, as a parent, moral choice is to make them a good person first before a religious person. That's the priority that we want to fight for. Next up.
As a Catholic parent, your child being a good person is important, but it's also equally as important to ensure that my child does not go to hell and is confirmed as a Catholic. Why isn't that equally and legitimately important for that Catholic person to not want to bear the moral sin of sending their child to hell?
Right. Number one, we need to acknowledge in this debate, since you want to teach people to be more ethical and more compassionate without the barrier of religion, obviously we are not going to promote the idea you should steal, you should do all those unethical stuff. Because remember, all those stuff can be taught without the element of religion. And therefore, we think that parents are still doing some good ways in regards to of teaching them. Second argument, what is the best for other children as well? In status quo, we see a heavily insular groups when you attend school. Most of the time, Muslim kids only hang out with other Muslim kids. And most of the time, Christian kids only hang out with other Christian kids. You oftentimes resort to insult people from other religion by calling them sinners from a young age as a kid. It means you further isolate yourself from any proper interaction with other race. This means you breed Islamophobia, like anti-Semitics from a young age. And therefore, the outcome here is far more evil in comparative in our world, where you have no barriers of religion. It's more like each other because you have no spectrum of elimination that exists under status quo. Obviously, you might say, oh, people are already eliminating them in race and so on. But we reduce one more barrier. At least now we have less evil in our world. Mr. Speaker, this debate is about a parent. If you think that your child will be more likely to be evil if indoctrinated with religious idea, what choice do you have? Heaven or hell? We think heaven is more likely on our brother. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for his speech. I now invite the Leader of Opposition.
It is a fiction that religion is all about ethics and compassion. The truth is, religion is about self-actualization. It's about a road that you take. You don't know if it's the best one, but it's one that makes you happy. That's the case we will bring to you. But before that, a few contentions that don't quite fit in. First, Amshar would like to believe that simply because these children will be called as sinners, and this is the best case scenario and our worst case scenario. Okay, even within that trade-off, we tell you the alternative can be much worse and is likely to be much worse, whereby you don't have religion to resort to, whereby you don't have God to resort to, whereby you don't have hereafter to look forward to, because you know religion is still a probable aspect. You might still enter heaven. On your last day, some admission might make your God happy and you are going to go to heaven. The alternative is for the whole of your life, you live as a failure because maybe the society which is individualistic and materialistic simply doesn't see you as a successful case in point. So this side really has to tell us what are the alternatives that will be more fulfilling, because it cannot simply be a void.
Sir?
We tell you that void will be filled by harmful alternatives. The second contention is, oh, you know, but it's because your children will grow up to be less ethical. Understand this, less ethical and being unethical are two very different things. You might as well grow up to be less ethical, but are you going to grow up being happier? Are you going to grow up not living in a hell of your own creation where you seek your identity every single day? If the answer to those questions are yes, we tell you it's a far better trade-off. Maybe you're not as ethical as the societal constructs would judge you to be. It's society who defines what ethics anyway, but at least you're still happy. Therefore, the question is, are there other considerations? And this is where I'll deal. This is the question I'll deal with in my constructives. And if there are other considerations that religion can successfully dispose of and disperse and give to you, that is literally the reason why religion should still be the predominant thing that you teach your children, right? So that's pretty much the thing. And like upon other considerations, like, but even in the worst case scenario, right? Like even if you're going to, we essentially tell you that first, it still disregards a lot of religions like Buddhism, which doesn't have the concept of heaven and hell anyway. Concept. Secondly, it also fails to take into consideration that the concepts of heaven and hell are extremely uncertain. But thirdly, it also fails to take into consideration that the alternative is when you live in a hell of your own creation, where you're seeking for your identity, probably never to find it. Moving into constructive, a while later. Moving into constructive. There will be two angles of the debate we will analyze. The first angle will be to prove to you that religion's dominant imperative, it may be one of the many imperatives, but its dominant imperative is never to imbue ethics and like societal considerations of what's good and what's not, right? But it has other imperatives. The second angle is we're going to tell you why even from a very utilitarian step, that even from a very utilitarian perspective, is the counterproductive step to take. So moving on to the first burden, why later? I'll ask you. So moving on to the first aspect of the debate. Like meaning of life probably sounds very vague to you, but people who explore the meaning of life know how harmful it is. The smartest minds of our generation and previous generations like Nietzsche lived in hell of their own creation, searching for a meaning of their life, never to find it. There has been no scientific paper written about what's meaning of life. There has been no objective step about what makes life happy. We give you the alternative. We give you religion. We give you a worldview and a lifestyle to live by. These are things that you therefore do not have to think about every day. We do not think every person has to be considerate about the thousands of factors that you live with every day. I believe I as an individual can simply think about what makes love important, what makes my work important, and not have to think about what makes my life meaningful because I subscribe to a religion. Subscribing to that religion simplifies my life, and it means that I can tunnel vision on things that actually matters to me. That's why meaning of life is not simply a vague concept. And the alternative under their side is where you have to live in a whole of your health of your own creation. We simply do not know what alternatives to choose from. But the second level is what the likely alternatives you're going to fall into. The likely alternatives are the dominant alternatives the society already proposed, which is likely to be things like materialism, which is likely to be things like individualism, and that is where a second contention comes in. Whereby we tell you all other possible alternatives are much more pernicious because those are not alternatives which are freely accessible to all. Because religion is one good that even a poor individual can access to. Even a poor individual can go to Batu Caves and gain happiness. A poor individual can enter a mosque and gain happiness. And it's the whole degree of happiness. You can have access to the whole range of happiness. On the alternative, an individual who doesn't necessarily subscribe to religion and idea of an afterlife has to go for other things, like maybe buy the Rolls Royce, but not everyone can afford to do things like that. But secondly, even if you don't take it to that extreme, even if it's simply about self-actualization and conceptualization of happiness, even then things like university degrees become extremely important. Having to read Nietzsche is probably most important thing if you want to find alternative to religion. But most people I know don't even do things like that. They simply don't have avenues to explore those things. So I mean, how do you possibly give people the alternative concepts that may enable them to self-actualize their life? So it's not simply about the children that Amshar wants you to believe. I mean, it is about the children, but it's also about the society as a whole, where individuals simply should not have to go through that ordeal in the first place. But before I move into the third aspect,
Chitab, as a child, I want to seek happiness. I want to explore other religion. I want to explore multiple self about me. But that imposition by your parents prevents you from seeking all of this happiness that you want to talk about, Chitab.
no, if you're, I mean, here's the thing, the dichotomy is if imposition of a certain religion reduces the chance of you exploring other avenues of happiness. Imposition of non-religion also therefore increases your avenues of exploring religion, because that's the imposition that it's both impositions. Therefore, it's a comparative of which imposition is more likely to make you self-actualize. But the third context therefore is how religion is communal, and a communal aspect is very beneficial to people because people like to live communally. People like to go for Juma, and things like that are very visceral that people can easily subscribe to. But the second contention of the debate therefore is even the worst case scenario, even a very utilitarian society should never impose something like this for two key reasons. Because first, it means that first you have to see a lot of these inconsistencies that religion might have can easily be phased out. So for example, slavery and other things were often supported by religion, but these were things that were easily phased out. But the second reason and the more important and the more compelling reason is because there is an opt-out clause already embedded within the society. Therefore, the people who do not necessarily support religion have nothing to worry about, because there is an increasing tide of people who are leaving religion. We tell you, we bring in the contention that there is a huge amount of fluidity. You can easily subscribe to that sort of thing. Even in a very conservative country like Bangladesh, where atheists are sometimes hacked to death, the whole world goes on an uproar because these are people who have been killed based on their lack of religious beliefs. That means there's a huge support structure behind these people. Therefore, we tell you that even from a very utilitarian perspective, even as the movement of people who don't necessarily believe in atheism, necessarily believe in religion, you have no reason to do that sort of imposition, because first, there are already many ways of changing these things naturally, but secondly, the opt-out clauses are much above. Therefore, we provide you the better alternative. Certainty is often more important than truth, which you'll never find anywhere because it's elusive high definition.
I thank the leader of opposition for the speech, and I invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
The darkness I am brought into the light. Because Shitab did not tell me why parents should be prioritizing their kids' happiness over their ethics. Because that was the presumption that he made, right? He just said, oh, parents should be choosing or should always make their kids happy. Even when we told you that the kids' happiness is in believing that Christians are heretics and that other individuals will go to hell. So even if what you are saying is true, which I will tell you that it is not, we do not believe that you should be stepping on other individuals and being less ethical. You as a parent should prioritize on making your children the best they can be. We don't think that your children should be happy in religion just so that they can have that happiness. But let's look at the first thing, the first assumption that he made. Because the first assumption that he made was that religion makes you a happier individual. And he did this by saying, oh, at least there's a hereafter to look forward to, etc. Except for individuals who want to have happy things now. For example, as an individual, I'm unable to have premarital sex because I believe that it will lead me to hell, right? I am unable to drink. I am unable to take a lot of choices that would also make me happy under your paradigm. But more than that, right? I also believe that a lot of things will bring me to hellfire. So the eternal guilt that exists under your paradigm is more likely than not going to make individuals unhappy. In fact, in Islam, it is never said that the purpose of Islam is to make you happy. It's to make you go through hardship, right? Like you pray through nights. Like the purpose of religion isn't necessarily to make you happy. It's to make you a slave towards God. Read up on Nietzsche. Because God is indeed there. But let's look at the second thing, right? You said that, look, these, even for the extreme scenario, let's look at the extreme case where religion does make you happy, a minor fraction. We told you that if that's the case, you can already choose that under our paradigm. Because we want kids to be able to grow under a multitude of, or a secularist religion, right? And the thing about secularism is that it is more likely to encourage you to question your beliefs, unlike the imposition that happens under religion. So for the spectrum of individuals that occur under your side, if they are happier through religion, they can have that as well. But if they are also happier through secularism, at the very least, they can choose to opt out under our side, something that we think does not happen under your proposal. So even if, right, you assume that individuals will be unhappy, we still think that's better because at least they'll be more ethical, Shitab. So that means our world still looks better for the people who are inside of it. And I am okay with that. But let's look at the second thing. He says that a lot of people are dependent on religion because religion will allow ethics to happen and that this whole meaning of life argument that occurs. Sit down. First of all, it's extremely insulting for you to say that secularism doesn't also impose its own meaning of life or doesn't have its own meaning of life for its individual. Like my meaning of life, sit down, my meaning of life could be that I wake up, I live a good life, and then I die. I do not have to have the hereafter to have a meaning of life, guys. But secondly, there's this whole idea about Islamophobia that occurs under their side. Sit down and let's look at that. Like this isn't even the debate, right? This isn't about an imposition of Islamophobia upon other individuals. But let's say like you want Islamophobia will happen. We think it will happen worse under their side anyway, because kids are more likely to grow up insular against other individuals and be far more Islamophobic because they believe from a young age they're cultivated that Christians are evil individuals or stay away from those Jews because they have big noses and are very like greedy. Before I move on to my argumentation, Shita.
So like essentially secularism is when you can choose all your values versus religion where you're given a more or less rigid set of values. So essentially, like, how do you compare the happiness under both paradigms? Like, if religiosity just makes you happy, what's the problem with that? It makes you a bit less.
Okay, so it's the prioritization, right? Like, so we think that the methods of secularization are more likely to lead you to a multitude. So the idea that you are allowed to question, the idea that there isn't a set methodology, the idea of grounding your rationality on empirical data, we think it's the methodology that secularism provides. So at the point where even if you are happier choosing religion, then secularism or teaching your kids secularism is more likely to lead towards those things to begin with. But we think that the last thing that we want to tell you is that if you as a parent want your kid to go to heaven, we tell you that you would rather have that kid go to heaven because he is a good person and he sincerely believed in Catholicism rather than the fact that he was an evil person and it was simply imposed upon him. Let's look at why the imposition of religion is going to be extremely traumatic towards children. Because let's look at how religion teaches children things, right? We think number one, religion indoctrinates by fear. So they use a lot of mental imagery. For example, when I was a young kid, I used to steal things. And my mother used to tell me that when you die, what's going to happen is as a punishment, the angels will rip out your tongue and it will grow back and then ripped out again. Like I am a 6-year-old kid, right? And this is the mental imagery that is happening through my mind. Number one, the amount of trauma that is happening through those kids due to the mental imagery that religion is more likely to use is like absolutely messes up children from a young age. They are less likely to be mentally stable. They are less likely to go to their parents towards having support structure. But even then, right, even then, we think that it restricts your choices. Because now when I'm older and I'm thinking that I should join secularism, I always hearken back to the mental imagery because that's what I was conditioned in when I was young. So now I am unable to ever opt out of Islam because there is an intrinsic part within me, there's a trauma within me that tells me that if I ever leave Islam, my tongue and my skin will be peeled off from the back of my head. We think, therefore, the ability for individuals to be happy because they cannot choose what is best for them is far less under your side when they are continuously imposed from a young age. Particularly when you analyze that kids are the one who are most likely to remember it until adulthood, right? And they have no choice to opt out of this because they are not intelligent enough to know what's true and what is false. So they are simply sponges who absorb whatever like mental imagery you tell them. We think that's extremely, extremely harmful. The comparative in this debate is that we think we at least come up with a far more ethical and a far more better world. You as a parent have to do the responsible thing, teach your kids, right? I'm so goddamn proud to propose.
I thank Deputy Prime Minister for speech. I now invite Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Sharif was made to go to admin school, so his 7-minute speech was really a resentment towards religion, without necessarily engaging with his imperative comments at opposition. What can make you happy? We think secularism imposes a certain belief on you as well. It indoctrinates to you that you have to struggle to find your own values. You have to now struggle to find what meaning you have in life. But yeah, Sharif then says, oh guys, but if I don't go to hell or heaven, or if I don't believe there's heaven or hell, I can still have meaning. Okay, but you are still supposed to struggle and search for that meaning. Religion gives you that salvation. Religion gives you certain answers that you otherwise would not be able to find. We think for all of those values that religion can also offer you, it shouldn't be the objective metric that ethics is the only reason as to why the belief system should be able to survive. In my speech, I'll analyze 3 things. Number 1, I'll tell you, we'll analyze, will analyze why ethics really is not the only basis as to why a belief should exist. Number 2, I'll talk about how religion offers you salvation and then offers you happiness. And number 3, I'll tell you that even if we concede to the harms that side government wants to pose, that religion ultimately gives disenfranchisement within society. We think secularism is not necessarily the way to go. We think in order for you to want to fix it, you have to moderate it and not read it out completely. Before that, a few things that don't add up into my speech. Sit down. We think number 1, this side of the house wants to resort to the most extreme scenarios where parents will tell you, if you do not do something, you will be lynched or you will necessarily be killed off. All of those things are we can see that those things happen. But we think on a wider scale, you have to be willing to engage with the benefits that religion can give as well. Those kinds of ideologies are harmful, but they are propagated through misinformation. ISIS tells you, Surah At-Tawbah, verses 5 and 7, which means you have to wage war with people who you don't believe in or who don't believe in what you believe in. But they skip verse 6, which tells you you don't have to if you have not been attacked yourself. Meaning, it's all in retaliation, right? So all of these things, extreme circumstances that they want to run off with are through misinformation and misappropriation of religion. Sit down. But there are values, there are intrinsic values. See, Sharif, you grew up in Nadni, but you turned out somewhat okay, right? You think at which point you are able to still be allowed to exist as a religious person, but be exposed to counter narratives. That's when you can reconcile and still be a happy religious person, even when the whole world can tell you you have all sorts of different beliefs, right? We think that this debate cannot revolve around a binary where you have to either be circular or you have to be religious, right? Side opposition will defend that you cannot necessarily place a value on either. How do you objectively place a value on these two different sets of beliefs? It's not the way through ethics. We say no to fascism. We say no to Nazism because there are objectively harmful effects that Nazism and fascism pose. But religion is not necessarily objectively harmful. Neither is secularism. But we think religion can give you happiness that secularism cannot say. Moving on to my understanding, right? Is ethics really the only basis as to why a belief should exist? No. We think religion posits to you a lot of other things as well. Ethics is not like it's completely absent. Religion still tells you you cannot kill people, right? If you kill people, obviously you will go to hell. We think this side of that, it's not enough for a Sharif to tell you, oh guys, it made me scared, right? I'm so fearful. But that's also an argument as to why we shouldn't have laws. We are taught that if we do not follow laws, repercussions and consequences are necessarily very, very damaging. We are supposed to do those things because it enables you to now dictate your behavior and your conduct to become a proper individual within society and prove your purpose as well in society. No, thank you. We think all of these reasons are not the reasons why religion shouldn't exist, but a lot of reasons why as to why you shouldn't be afraid at all, right? We think that's not the debate at hand. You need to realize that a lot of different struggles have to be made in order for someone to find meaning when it comes to, life. It doesn't matter if we input fear. If at the end of the day it is a trade-off we are willing to make, that you can also have tangible benefits or that feeling of content that you otherwise would not be able to get. This screwed world can be very screwed up. A lot of people need religion, not just for solace, but as that salvation that no other form of alternative can provide. Before I move on, opening.
Bani, why do you prefer a world full of religious people, but they are less ethical and less compassionate? Why are you okay with that world and the people who are suffering around that?
Because Shitak told you that's not, number one, that's not necessarily true. Like, religion can still be a very communal thing, which means you can still be with other people. But at the same time, right, you haven't shown me why not having ethics, like what, maybe throwing rubbish out, like littering, is necessarily an objective metric as to why a person is evil. If you do not have ethics, it does not mean you are an evil person. Because at the end of the day, Shitak already told you there is a utilitarian benefit to religion. In the same way, there is a utilitarian and individualistic benefit to secularism. We think that comparative has to be realized, right? Second idea. Why do we think it's important for religion to be a salvation for not just parents, but for parents to indoctrinate for their kids as well? Because we think not only is a moral obligation for them to feel like they do not want their loved ones to go to hell, we think, parents also realize that in order for them to not lose someone they love, as to the damnation of hellfire, they need to be able to indoctrinate or educate them with certain values that religion posits. For example, they can learn from the historical benefits of what Prophet Muhammad did, right? It's not like it's not religion is devoid of practical benefits as opposed to just ethical benefits. Religion can also teach you sirah, which teaches you the history of how the Prophet did in Medina and how he treated Christians and Jews. Perjanjian Hudaybiyah, Perjanjian Aqabah. All of these things can be things that people can refer to, as opposed to it just being about ethics. Religion gives you practicality as well. It does not have to be the only metric as to why you judge a belief system and why that belief system has to be weeded out. Third substandard. Why do we think, even if we concede to the harms that government side gives, that the solution is not to weed out religion, is to moderate religion? This is assuming that this is the harm that exists. Telling people that religion cannot exist does not moderate religion. Realizing that religion has to be reconciled with contemporary issues and moderated is a way of realizing that religion can still give you happiness, even though this is a new thing. Islam used to say yes to slavery. It says no to it now because it adapts to contemporary changes within society, which means that there are more opt-out clauses now than there ever was before. That means there are more counter-narratives and interpretations now than there ever was before. You do not have to weed out religion and tell kids you are better off without, because indoctrination will happen even under your paradigm. It makes it harder for people to want to explore religion because that bigots will still exist. Bigots like Richard Dawkins will still tell you religious people are stupid nuts, right? A lot of these other bigots will still exist. This is not a comparative only about extreme bigots. This is a comparative of what can make you happy. For a lot of different people, it's subjective. We do not agree with that binary. Go with opening opposition.
After the Leader of Opposition speech, to open the second half of the debate, I invite the member of government.
The opening half so far has been a religious debate as to whether or not religion is good or bad. The nuances that's supposed to create and why parents themselves cannot impose this upon their child based upon what parental obligations should require was still absent in their opening half. But also, what we need to answer as well under our speech, which we'll extend, is that actually when you prioritize ethics, you also help these children access religion better when they grow up. Because we don't want this debate to be about anti-religion. We want this to be the child be able to make the best decisions at the end of the day, right? Because in my speech, I'll actually talk to you how the image of religion will actually be better when these people are led by examples and they don't have to raise this child through things like religion, for example. And secondly, I'm also going to talk about the fact that even if we concede that religion, dogma is irreversible later when they grow up, why the harms that have happened as they grow up is not a worthy trade-off. And lastly, I'm also going to talk about the idea of the support structure which parents have that makes an unfair advantage that gives towards a particular child when they grow up, right? Before I move on towards these things, I feel like a few characterizations need to be made, right, that was missing so far. When we talk about raising children with religion, we're not talking about the fact that their parents are Muslims and they tell their children about Islam. The fact that the parents impose rules in which you say the moment you reach a certain age, you have to wear a hijab. When the moment you reach Sunday, you have to go to Sunday mass, right? Because you think even if the parents say Assalamu alaikum, but tells the child, look, this is not the only way of life that exists. You can also opt into other lives that is not being raised with religion per se, because it doesn't include the exclusionary element that necessarily exists in which these people tend to prioritize at the end of the day. This is not squirreling, because on the third level, we also say even if these parents do not have any methods of compulsion, we still say that it's still inherently bad at the end of the day because the support structure advantage which parents have over their children, right? But before I move on to these things, a few rebuttals I feel do not belong in these particular issues. Firstly, this idea about what about the parents' happiness in order to ensure their child doesn't go to hell. Firstly, they've also conceded that the idea of hell and heaven is very subjective, because we will also contend that divine justice is subjective. Because a lot of people who don't pray still go to heaven because of the many niceties that they do towards minorities, but a lot of people who pray a lot still go to hell because they've tortured cats, because they've murdered prostitutes in both religions of Islam and Christianity. So the idea of divine justice and forgiveness still exists on your side, and it's very prospective as to the worry of the parent. But a definite harm that exists towards this child, the bridges that are burnt when they grow up with exclusionary religion, is definite at the end of the day, and it's not something that is subjective, right? But a lot of my other contentions would exist under my issues. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the support structure in which these parents have towards them. Right? So firstly, we think the support structure, the fact that the parents are feeding these particular children, teach them, deciding their education, and all of these things mean that there isn't a real opt-out clause at the end of the day. Going beyond just things like intelligence, like they cannot reason and all of these things, right? Because the parents can say, I will withdraw your allowance if you follow other forms of religions. I will withdraw your forms of education in order for you to not follow that particular religion. But let's be clear, in a context in which other secular individuals exist within the country, parents who are religious have a higher incentive to be more and more insular because they are worried they will be influenced by these other people. So they will also choose their friends, homeschool these individuals, ensure they enter Christian fellowship, making sure that they don't interact with wrong people or watch certain forms of media. This insularity is what's important to characterize because the opt-out clause doesn't exist. This also really rebuts a lot of the things that talked about, because they say, look, but atheists already have an opt-out clause at the end of the day because there's international scrutiny. Let's be clear here, the atheists in this example died, right? A lot of these people are harmed the moment they leave their particular communities, even within liberal democracies, because they lose the support structure in which they exist. They can rely upon their families and relatives, upon their community, even when they grow up. And that's how the harm is irreversible the moment they achieve even adulthood at the end of the day, right? But secondly, why exactly, if you can see that religion is reversible, it's still necessarily harmful? Because firstly, we think the reason why it's bad is when these children grow up as parents, like when Sharif grew up in Atni, even though he's okay now, when they grew up, he's excluded a lot of friends because his parents taught them you shouldn't be friends with these other people. He's been excluded certain forms of education because his parents taught them you shouldn't listen to this type of music, you shouldn't talk to these type of people, right? These bridges have been burnt. It means at the risk of other people who also lose their self-esteem because they feel excluded by their church camps and keep telling them that they're sinners. They've been excluded by other people who don't share their interests with them at the end of the day. But secondly, the reason why this is bad is, even if let's say they reverse and become the reason why this is bad is because when they grow up, they want to get to know people who are outside of their religious groups. They have to do an extra effort in terms of not just getting to know these individuals, but having to humanize them first. Like, oh, maybe you are people too. This extra effort that they need to make is what makes them, their moral compass, clouded and faced with all these things that happen at the end of the day. But thirdly, also, we think there's also lack of analysis of data, why the data and the slide is the way it is. It's because a lot of these individuals, when they grow up, actually do not believe in what their parents believe in. So but they hate themselves the moment their identity is particularly different. For example, they're a sexual minority or whatever, right? So they hate themselves and they punish themselves. And the fact that they grow up with all this hatred in their hearts, and it translates to how they treat other people as well. Let's say you have all these Christian fellowship people who are bullies. If you watch movies like Easy A and all these people, like these individuals are the ones who discriminate individuals the most, especially when they have the furthest forms of authority to oppress people. Closing.
So this debate cannot operate on extreme ends because insular and exclusionary parents exist on either side. You have racist parents and tiger parents who exploit their children for other people as well.
That's why my third issue is, what happens to religions who are open-minded? Why are they bad? Firstly, it's because we believe that even for religions that are open-minded do not indoctrinate these individuals at the end of the day, and also teach them other forms of ethics exist, right? But secondly, if these people are open-minded, they can still lead by examples to these other individuals, not telling them about hell or heaven or this other ethics, but by being good individuals and letting their kids see that, look, you are a good person, you can grow up to be this particular person. But the second thing that we also have to talk about is the fact that when you teach ethic first to these children, you also give them an ethical filter to determine what is wrong and what is right with their religion. Because then that's how you avoid things like only taking the 2 verses of At-Tawbah as opposed to reading the whole verse, because they do not have an ethical compass in order to determine their religion as opposed to the other way around, right? Within this ethical lens is why we think people will be able to have better access to religion when they have some forms of ethics, at least the right form of religion. But also this form of happiness is very important, right? Your form of happiness is based on dehumanizing individuals. We do not care if you feel less happy. We think other forms of ethics at least allow for scrutiny, even if they involve things like fascism and Nazism. But religion, even if they're good, they don't involve scrutiny. That's why it's inherently bad. Because we're the ones that show you the angle of parenthood and why it's actually better for religion. CG takes this debate.
Thank you, Member of Government, for speech. I now invite the Member of Opposition. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I headlined Squirrel in the middle of Tim's speech, and I'm glad that he listened and decided against going through that debate, ladies and gentlemen. Because eventually he agreed that religion does play some part, and this is about parents teaching their parents religion at the end of the day, not just some weird interpretation that they had at the start. We're going to shift this debate, ladies and gentlemen, from closing opposition, because we think that fundamentally, that religion is informed by your circumstances. Things like your economics, your history, as well as your social structures that you're part of, ladies and gentlemen. That is why every team in this debate so far has picked selective examples of which some religions have become extreme, some religions are not. You have some races who are exclusionary in Europe, while some other racial minorities are not experiencing the same exclusion in Canada, for example. Or religious minorities in some circumstances feel insular and don't need to humanize, while others do. The point is, this debate isn't about any culture of religion or just some blatant humanization, insularness about religion, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
This is about the circumstances of which people live in and how religion impacts and is able to affect people's lives within those circumstances. And that's why that's been missing in this debate. I'm going to tell you of how religion is the best tool in which you are able to overcome prejudicial social barriers in the most destitute and most desperate situations, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to take the worst case possible scenario of the government in which you're talking about Pakistan. You're talking about the most oppressive areas in society, ladies and gentlemen, and those are the circumstances in which religion is most likely going to change things, even though they are being used to oppress people maybe right now. I'm going to make an easy concession at the start of this speech, that religion is sometimes used to oppress, for example, women or religious minorities in those circumstances. But I'm going to tell you why exactly it is going to be the reason why it's going to change later on. First, I want to establish this, that oppression, for example, rural Pakistan, without Islam, would have been just as oppressive as it is now, even without Islam, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason for that is because the problem wasn't Islam. The reason was because of inherent poverty, ladies and gentlemen. The reason is because that Hitler rode on a wave of Europe being horribly poor to be able to indoctrinate people in the idea of Nazism, ladies and gentlemen.
The fact that you are able to have cultural patriarchal structures that play upon religion under that period of time. That means those things would have existed absent of religion under that side of the house. So what's important here, ladies and gentlemen? Sure, religion may empower in the short term, but why will it change? Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, we think religion is the only social construct which is interpretive by nature, ladies and gentlemen. Different from, for example, race, or your skin color, or your social class, ladies and gentlemen, which are arbitrary and definitive, cannot be changed. These are immutable characteristics that people will always be able to identify you as, and the meaning behind that color of your skin is not interpretive by nature because it's visceral and visual by nature. Religion is interpretive. That's why, and that's how some people are able, for example, Malala Yousafzai, to be able to interpret Islam through exegesis to say that women may be able to access education in some circumstances, gain massive popularity in that particular circumstance. But we think even in the worst case scenario in which religion, ladies and gentlemen, under that side, creates insular and makes you not see other people as human, ladies and gentlemen, there is an internal barrier of interpretation when it comes to religion. This is, for example, religion has some verses that say that you are good, and some verses that say that you may want to go to hell. Verses, ladies and gentlemen, things like nationalism, which are interpretive by nature, or for example, communism, ladies and gentlemen. The reason why this is very different is that those things are interpretive by nature, but those things don't have an internal barrier of saying when to stop, or a value proposition of saying that you are internally good. In religion, you are actually positive to do some good, even though you might be able to interpret some verses to do bad, ladies and gentlemen. That means there is a lower barrier to bad behavior when it comes to religion versus any other social structure that you may be able to interpret on your side. But even at the best case scenario of the opposition where you may be able to interpret it, ladies and gentlemen, in the societies that you're concerned about, conservative societies are horrible, ladies and gentlemen. These are societies that will not be able to find the agreement. For example, feminist groups that want to find different interpretations to their ideology, ladies and gentlemen, in those types of societies are more likely to form splinter groups rather than coalesce, ladies and gentlemen, and find agreements with each other. These are the people that are most likely going to be dogmatic in nature and not be able to find agreements between each other under that side of us. That means your movements, when it comes to other forms of ideology in these deeply repressed societies, are going to be divided in nature and not going to be unified under a single banner of God under status quo, ladies and gentlemen. That's why movements like Malala Yousafzai are so effective, because it is something that people don't have to directly oppose in order to believe, because I still have to believe in God, even if I believe in Malala Yousafzai. It's still unifying in nature, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why, even in any circumstance, in the worst case scenario, there's a low barrier and interpretive nature in which it's a godsend, even in the worst case scenarios. I will take opening.
Okay, even if all of this is true, why isn't it better for this to happen? Because religion and all religions do teach you that their way is the right way and you should not question what they say.
Ladies and gentlemen, the reason why that it doesn't happen more with secularism is exactly what I told you, because it doesn't change the circumstances in which you've already lived in. I can point you to many circumstances in which we have deeply secular societies that led to massacres. Stalin, Pol Pot, ladies and gentlemen, lived in societies and propagated communist ideologies and have massive genocides, ladies and gentlemen, and those weren't ever good. But I'm not saying that secularism caused those things. I'm saying that the circumstances in which people lived in led them to be those things. And secularism did nothing to change those circumstances, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why, under this particular circumstance, if you're talking about a destitute situation where people need hope, people need to be unified, ladies and gentlemen, and people are already deeply divided in a desperate, destitute situation. You need a unifying force that is be able to be interpreted and not be based on an arbitrary label that is non-interpretive, or, ladies and gentlemen, be interpretive but deeply divisive in nature under that side of the house. So fundamentally, at the end of this particular debate, ladies and gentlemen, you either have a society outrightly reject
Malaysia what society should be when it comes to secularism, or you can gain society's trust and the ability to have some sort of interpretive nature when it comes to dealing with the deeply prejudicial social barriers in the most destitute societies. We were the only team in which we were willing to concede there were harms on both sides and deal with the circumstances in which people lived in, ladies and gentlemen, and that is why we must propose.
I thank the member of opposition for the speech. I now invite Gong with Mayor.
I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, Muslim parents. My parents sent me to the mosque. I was made to become a hafiz. My community was mostly Muslim around me, and I was taught to be homophobic to the extent that my neighbors who happened to be gay, my parents told me don't go outside and play with them because they might influence you. Ironically, it's only when I came to IIU and joined the debate club and made many friends who happened to be homosexual and otherwise is when my views were able to be changed. I'm still a Muslim. I'm proud to be a Muslim. And I'm able to say that I'm still struggling with what my religion says about homosexuality. I don't think that they go to hell, but I do think homosexual acts, for example, may be something that's discouraged in Islam. And how to resolve those two things, I don't know yet. But I do know that I'm proud to be a Muslim and that I'm an ethical person and I love my homosexual friends as much as I love my straight ones. But the reason why it took me so long to be able to do that was because I was sheltered, was because I was forced to be raised as religion from a child, as opposed to letting my parents allow me to make my own decision from childhood. That is the difference that exists in this debate. Let's talk about what the definition of being raised within a religion actually looks like. Mifsal wants to say that it's a squirrel to do this, right? We'll tell you why it's not. First, the data, it obviously shows, if you read the study, that the reason why religious kids who are brought up in religious communities are less empathetic, are less ethical, is the fact that they are raised to be exclusionary. It's because they say, you need to do these things. You have to wear the hijab. Don't drink. People who do drink are sinners. Do not have a girlfriend or have sexual relationships because that is evil and you are therefore a sinner. And on that basis, they are taught to exclude others. That's why the data shows that people who are religious are more likely to be less empathetic and compassionate than other people who are not raised within those religious societies. Now, being raised as religious does not mean, as Zen told you, that you know your parents are Muslim and they go to the mosque. It means you are told to follow every single aspect of that religion. It means you are taught to be homophobic. It means you are taught that anyone who does not follow what you believe is wrong and they are sinners and they are going to hell. And this is the key distinction that Mifsal wanted to ignore in this debate. He wanted to tell us, oh, well, racists can be exclusionary as well, right? That's not the point. The point is that the data shows that people who are religious are more exclusionary and therefore are more divisive. So that's not even the debate at all because of the fact that they are raised in that particular environment. The data didn't show that racists happen to be less empathetic. It shows that kids who grow up in religious societies are less empathetic. Then he wants to tell us, well, look, in rural Pakistan, they would be just as extreme. He wants to take us at our best case. They would be just as extreme because of poverty and because of patriarchy that existed regardless of whether it was Islam or some other religion. Clearly, the fact that they are exclusionary is the fact from their ethics are derived from Islam itself. But we tell you that the data also shows, even if they would have still been patriarchal and they would have still been, extreme, they would have been less extreme because the ethical framework that they are brought up in is not dependent on religion. And this is the key point. This also responds to his argument about Islam has a higher barrier, or religion have a higher barrier of interpretation versus, other fascism or utilitarianism or whatever. Islam is also very clearly interpreted. This is why we have interpretations of patriarchy. This is why we have interpretations that all the extreme things we want to talk about, homophobia, for example, and of abuse against women and no women's rights. But the difference is this. You can be racist, you can have all these other things, but the difference is when it comes to the distinction of heaven and hell and the afterlife, that makes it far more important. This is why people who are religious are far more likely to be less empathetic and far more likely to be less compassionate to others in the process. So you can tell me that there are all these other systems that you can subscribe to that can also make you bad. We agree. But we tell you that religion uniquely makes you less empathetic and makes the world a worse place to live in because of the fact that you prioritize your heaven and hell over all the other things that you need to do. And that's why you're terrible to people. No, thank you. Let's talk about how you can still have access to the religious benefits on our side as well. We tell you that on our side, even religions prioritize your ethics and compassion. We think that religious doctrine exists on a spectrum of priority. So in Islam, you're told you and to wear the hijab. You're also told to be good to your neighbor. The Prophet said, I was sent to you to perfect your good morals and ethics. And that was the priority of the Prophet. Not the prayer, not necessary to wear the hijab, not homosexuality. You can be homosexual and still go to heaven because you are a good person, because you pray, and because you are ethical to your neighbors. That's what Islam prioritizes and teaches. But we think in the absence of that prioritization, when you indoctrinate kids from a young age, because of the fact that they don't know how to differentiate between those two, you tell them two contradictory things. One, be a good person. Two, those people are sinners. They don't know how to reconcile that. And they reconcile it by being able to say, those people are not joining us, they are bad people. So they rationalize their ability to be mean to the other kids. They rationalize their ability to be able to say that those people are sinners, therefore I don't have to treat them as a decent human being. But under our model, you are able to access the ethics that exist on our side because you prioritize the ethics. So yes, you grow up, maybe you don't go to the mosque, but at least the mosque is now more welcoming to you because the society around you now is not one that forces you to attend Friday prayer. That mosque now compels you, like you can do good deeds on the existence of that priority. So even if you don't necessarily pray or wear hijab as a young child, your parents don't have to worry about you going to heaven or hell because you are still fulfilling the priority of what that religion is. I'll take opening.
To the extent living in an Islamic household makes you homophobic, living in a secular household can also make you Islamophobic. But living in living in a religious household gives you a common and communal worldview. How do you replicate that?
Okay, first off, let's deal with this analysis because we think that closing also tried to buy into Shitab's argument on this as well. We don't think people make decisions on ethics based on philosophical arrangement. Do I subscribe to utilitarianism or to a materialism or do I subscribe to a religion? We think people think that universal ethics are just that. They are universal. Be good to your neighbor. Don't be a dick. Make sure you are nice to everyone around you. And we think on that basis, people necessarily can access those without having the religion as a subset of that. And that's also the deal with, in Pakistan, for example, we provide the ethical lens that exists irrespective of the existence of the afterlife that is inherently prioritized under your model. At the point when later on you grow up and you become an adult, those things, like you can still access that religion if you so inherently choose. And there are benefits to do that. And the reason is that the community that you grow up in will now accept you in return. It means your religion is more welcoming. It means the example that they set for you and all the things that's been talked about before is something that will make you want to accept the beauty of that religion and enter it. At the end of the day, this debate isn't about whether religion is good or bad. It's about prioritization of what religion teaches you and how the world benefits by prioritizing your ethics and being good to everyone around you so that you can access the benefits in the afterlife after you've appreciated that. We're supremely proud.
I thank Dr. Vic. To end this debate, I invite the opposition group.
Mr. Chair, we believe this debate has to stop being so selective. This debate cannot be a comparison of the most extreme part of religions and compare that to the most ethical parents in the world. That debate cannot exist, and the most unfair debate I've heard in the world. We think that the most guilty for that in particular was both of the government bench, right? But in particular, let's talk about closing government and the two assumptions they made in this debate. Firstly, they only wanted to deal, and they were more blatant and outright about it than their opening government, that they only wanted to deal with pure exclusionary and insular parents. Those definitely exist on both sides. Those exist in tiger parenting, those exist in racist individuals, those also exist in elite individuals who believe in insular parenting. We don't believe that we should defend that on both sides of the house. But furthermore, if you were to analyze whether that's actually a religious belief to be exclusionary and insular, we believe that's not. Religions like Christian as well as Islam actually promotes inclusionary policies rather than exclusionary policies. They believe that across different societies, we should interact, especially from a young age and especially from children. So those individuals are inherently not the most religious people anyway. So we don't think that. And then secondly, they also are only willing to stand by parents being ethical first and then later on teaching their children what religion essentially is. Firstly, they cannot also try to only defend the most ethical parents and then compare that to the most outrightly religious people. We think that's an unfair debate. But furthermore, let's really analyze the situation that Hazem went through as an individual. Right? He said that Hazem thought that homosexuals was bad because he was sheltered as a child. But in adulthood, he grew up, he met a lot of friends in IIUM, still surrounded by that same Islamic individuals, and he's still an Islamic individual. That perfectly demonstrates that there are spectrums of individuals who are religious across the board, who can both convince him that homosexuals is bad and can convince him that homosexuals are not bad and individuals are human too. We believe that spectrum is important to recognize that ethical people within religion exist as well. But furthermore, we tell you why Hazem was susceptible to that change when he was susceptible to that change because we think that he was brought up inherently as a loving and compassionate person. Inherently because he was brought up with that religious culture that inherently had moral compasses that he was brought up with. We think that moral compass and that love and compassion was something that religion exclusively teaches you, that can changes you as an individual. That's why if you realize the discussion of religion, whether they're bent on homosexuality or whether or not they're against or for homosexuality, has now evolved because the discussion is predicated on love and compassion and what's best for the religion and society. That's always the starting point of discussion of religion. That's why religion is also an open interpretation. It's not dead set on certain values, but their values are always going back to what's best for inherently the entire society rather than other more nationalistic sentiments. It's important to realize this if you compare the discussions in Europe and the discussion that Pope Francis has about the refugee crisis. Europe, an inherently secular nation, decides to discuss the refugee crisis in a very nationalistic and self-interested approach. That's because that's an inherent belief of secular people to be more self-interested and nationalistic as opposed to a religious approach to be more inclusionary and to include every single part of society, whether they are part of your nation or whether they are not part of your nation. That's why the approach to the refugee crisis was significantly different from Europe and from secular societies. And to religious society, we prefer the approach and the moral compass that religious society has. We think that open discussion can always happen. No, thank you. We believe that on our side, we told you very clearly, and we think received very little engagement, was that religion is a tool and the most malleable tool to overcome prejudice and immutable characteristics. We told you this, and the only thing they said was that sometimes religion causes harm too. That's not really the debate or not the question. The question is whether or not religion is an effective tool and a unifying tool for us to be able to interpret certain values in society in the most positive manner, as opposed to every other belief structure that you want to opt into. Things like capitalism, things like self-interest, things like collective security of your own country are things that are not structures of belief that we think are most beneficial for society. No, thank you. We think religion is the only exclusive unifying tool that's able to overcome all these other prejudice and immutable characteristics. We also think that comparatively, between secularism, nationalism, racial supremacy, and all these other beliefs, you cannot compel morals in any form of those belief and framework. Because morals are something you can only compel through religious frameworks. That means that any discussion that starts with religion is a discussion that has to start with moral values, compassion, and go from there. We think that inherently it's the same thing when it comes to parenting and children. When they grow up, you want them to question everything from the starting point of morality and move on from there. That's why their further interpretation of the world will become a lot more wholesome and a lot more moral because their starting point has always been moral in nature. Before that, housing.
Stop just assuming that secularism can be dogmatic too. Between secularism and religion, which one is more open to scrutiny when there's no imposition of parental structures or afterlives?
Both are actually open to scrutiny and open to discussion. The point is, at which point, what is the starting point of secularism discussion and what is the starting point of religious discussion? The framework of religion has always started with moral values and what is best for society. But what is best for every part of society, especially the most vulnerable? When secularist point of view and discussion can be interpreted and can move on to things like self is for our nation, as opposed to who is the most vulnerable in society and whether that's a priority. The priority of religion has always been the more moral priority, and we think that's significantly better. We believe that most of the other arguments that came up in this debate that don't fit anywhere, things like Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, how we can overcome that without teaching religion. We believe things like xenophobia or things like the way in which you view religious people are sentiments that exist between divided societies anyways. But the point in which you're able to overcome that is by teaching them from the point of morality. So we don't think you're able to deal with that anyways. We don't think that children that are brought up in religious households will necessarily be individuals that are indoctrinated, unable to think and unable to grow up in a framework that's healthy. We think the framework that religion hold and give you is a framework that starts and ends with a discussion that's inclusionary, a discussion that's moral, and force you to think about the fact that you have to be a good person at the end of the day, because God loves you for the good person you are. And what is good later on is up to discussion and what you can base your life on at the end of the day. This is the only tool that you can use in order to unify people towards a greater good. We're extremely proud to host.
Feel like we switch roles from Dot. Remember Dot?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Ow, ow, ow.